All right, on today's Locked On Bucks live edition here, we take a look back at the win against the Detroit Pistons. Bucks were able to avoid massive letdown in that game and a few bright spots that really shined in that victory as well. We'll get to that and preview tonight's matchup, another back-to-back on the horizon against a very, very interesting Houston Rockets team. We'll get to all of that and hear from you on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. So the Bucks get past the Pistons last night. No surprise there, although I think a lot of Bucks fans probably enter that game with an uneasy feeling. It's a Pistons team that had lost 22 consecutive games, sixth longest losing streak in NBA history. That extends to 23 now. The record is 28, by the way, which the Pistons would set or tie against the Boston Celtics in a little over a week, should it get there. But I think the uneasiness is always, look, whenever you got a team on a skid like that, winning streak or losing streak, it is bound to go the other way eventually. And this Bucks team has been nothing if not consistently inconsistent so far this season. But it was imperative, and we heard from Adrian Griffin prior to the game. He echoed these sentiments after the game as well. Those first 5 minutes of the game were very, very critical to Griff for his team and the results of that game. We heard that before the game, and I think the reason is simple. You know, we've spent time on this show talking about some of the struggles the Bucks have had in the opening quarter of games. It seems to be a distant memory now. They've started to piece together a lot more consistent play early in the game. But in that matchup with the Pistons especially, you kind of compare it to games at the collegiate level where you think about NCAA tournament games or conference tournament games. The number one thing you don't want to do is let the underdog hang around and give them hope, because all of a sudden things start to change and go their way, and that instills more confidence the longer they linger around. We saw some parts of that in the first matchup with the Pistons earlier this year, although that was a very, very weird game. Bucks were up double figures. Giannis gets ejected on that, frankly, garbage second technical foul, and the Pistons go on a run, build up a 10-point lead, and the Bucks have to come back. So little strange scenarios in that first game, but still, you don't want a young team to hang around in the game and let them believe they can do this, and especially a team that has lost 22 consecutive games, that if you jump on them early, the thought is, look, they're likely going to quit and say, here we go again. And that's what we saw from the Bucks. Those first 5 minutes were certainly key, and especially in those first 5 minutes, it was MarJon Beauchamp that was the guy that was really the story for the Bucks here, as he had the first 7 points of the game for the Bucks. Andre Jackson Jr. in the starting lineup as well. He got off to a very good start. Fouls are going to continue to be the issue and the thing to monitor with Ajax, which we'll get to. But this was a very, very good game for MarJon Beauchamp here. He finishes the game with 11 points, 6 rebounds, goes 4 of 8 from the field. Andre Jackson Jr. with 10 points and 8 rebounds. So both of those players, especially Ajax, were very, very active on the glass. And again, MarJon with the first 7 points of the game for the Bucks. He was the guy. We saw him get to the free throw line early in this one. Bucks' first points of the game came on a pair of MarJon free throws, but he was the guy that was really setting the tone and matching the energy. He and Andre Jackson Jr. matching the energy of a younger Detroit Pistons team, because it was night 2 of a back-to-back for the Pistons, but it's a very young team that, you know, I don't know how much that matters when you have a team that's as young as the Pistons are. So to have those two guys in the starting lineup and be able to bring that energy and match the energy you assumed you would see from a younger group, I thought was very, very key to the Bucks and their success against the Pistons last night. And now for both of these players, but I think for MarJon especially, he had kind of gone through some dips recently. Started off getting that playing time, playing very well, and then it kind of took a step backwards, some of the inconsistencies that you would expect from a second-year pro. But now you piece together this game. I think for MarJon, it's especially key to come out and have a strong showing tonight against the Houston Rockets and do the same and start to put together a pretty strong homestand here and build on some of that consistency. But look, the moment the starting lineups were revealed, it was everything that I think Bucks fans, Bucks Twitter, Bucks Reddit, wherever, everything they had wanted. Here's our chance to finally see MarJon, Beauchamp, Andre Jackson in the starting lineup with Giannis and Damian Lillard, and it did not disappoint. As for Andre Jackson Jr., I mentioned it before. You continue to be impressed with some of the veteran type things that he does. The basketball IQ that is certainly there, and some of the plays that we've spotlighted on this show. I've spotlighted on the radio broadcast and other shows as well. Just those little things, the attention to detail that Andre Jackson Jr. brings, that especially very, very early into the season, that was just absent for this Bucks team. It was something that was not there. Andre Jackson Jr. brings a lot of that. And that's, I think, what's ultimately going to keep him on the floor, that and his energy and his defensive acumen. But the one thing that we've touched on repeatedly, and Frank has even compared Andre Jackson Jr. to a smaller version of Thanasis, and I think you have seen that at times, is he has to harness some of that energy and some of the fouls that he picks up. You have to start wondering, okay, is this a foul we can do without? There was a chase down attempt that he had early in the game. I believe it was on Bojan Bogdanovic, where nobody else was back. Andre Jackson Jr., you give him credit for hustling and getting in on the play, but it's a play you're likely not going to disrupt, and it just results in a foul. And again, for a player that has a propensity for picking these up, part of that is who he's guarding and the fact that as a young player, you're not going to get a favorable whistle. That's certainly a big part of it. But another part of it, too, is just understanding what plays you can do without. And I think that's part of the evolution we're going to look for from Andre Jackson Jr. going forward, because his play speaks for itself, and it's getting harder and harder not to carve out even more minutes for Andre Jackson Jr. 26 of them last night against the Pistons, 33 for MarJon Beauchamp. And we've traditionally seen Andre Jackson Jr. coming in under 10 minutes. So I think he has certainly made a strong case for he needs to be at that 15-plus minute mark, maybe even pushing closer to 20, depending on the matchup on a nightly basis. And how he manages his fouls, that is going to be a big, big key in Andre Jackson Jr.'s continued minutes and his growth coming up this season. So I do want to take a look at another interesting team that comes into Milwaukee tonight in the Houston Rockets, and preview that matchup just a little bit, but a lot more numbers to get to from Giannis, especially, that we're going to touch on coming up after the break. And after we tell you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it is just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then watch the winnings roll in. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill, comedian Andrew Schultz, you can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in Prize Picks community each week. And Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an insurance policy. It's easy to play. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, and the code is LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDONNBA. Use that code for a first deposit match up to $100 on Prize Picks. Okay, so I did mention the Houston Rockets. We will preview that matchup coming up in just a moment here, as that should be a fun one. But if you want to learn a little bit more about the Houston Rockets or any other team that's out there, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. As for Giannis, some of the numbers I said we would get to here for Giannis, what he has done this season. Camille and I spent some time last week talking about the efficiency and how absolutely incredible it has been so far for Giannis this season. Season numbers as a whole, he has played in 24 games. He is averaging just under 32 points per game. That is third most in the NBA, trailing Luka Doncic by about a point per game and Joel Embiid by about 2.5 points per game. But Giannis is shooting 63% from the field. For context, Embiid, a big man who should be shooting at a very high percentage, 53%. Kevin Durant is up to 52%. Nikola Jokic is 54%. Tyrese Halliburton, who's taken some threes, but a lot of layups too, 52%. LeBron James, a model of efficiency in the last decade plus in his career, 55%. And here sits Giannis at 63% field goal shooting. The other things that jump out, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, he is averaging 1.7 3-point attempts per game. That is the lowest amount of threes per game that Giannis has attempted since his third season in the league, and that was the last season before Giannis became a perennial all-star. He's shooting 67% at the free throw line, which, look, that number in itself is not going to be good enough. And you can scoff at that and say, man, it's still in the 60% for Giannis. But I think there's a little more nuance to it. And just for context, last year, Giannis was a 65% free throw shooter. The year prior, defending the championship, he was a 73%, 72.5% free throw shooter. And that was after we saw him piece together much better shooting at the free throw line late in that postseason run. Prior to that, the year the Bucks won the title, 69% free throw shooter, 63% the year before that. He was from 2014-15 all the way to 2018-19. So we're talking about a span of 5 seasons here. His second year in the league, through the first year Coach Mike Budenholzer arrived. He was in the 70%, 74, 72, 77, 76, and 73. He's moving closer towards that. Now, what is the reason for those dips? I don't know. He's changed his shooting delivery and motion a number of times through the years. Whatever it is he's done recently seems to be working, because I've mentioned a couple of times that game in Toronto against the Raptors, when Giannis didn't play, that was when the offense for the first time really started to hum. Damian Lillard was moving the ball around. He had 24 points in the first half. The assist numbers really started to pile up for that team. It was all about ball movement, finding open shooters, and Damian Lillard was running the offense. Then Damian Lillard goes out, and he misses 2 games. And that's when Giannis really started his takeover. That I do think just that gap of having Dame have to run the show, Giannis have to run the show, both of those guys leaning on things that they did not only last year, but through the years for both of these guys who are number one alpha options on their team. I think that helped speed up some of this chemistry and some of this development with the Bucks offense. And the numbers back that up. So if we go back to the first game Giannis played after missing that game against the Raptors, he has appeared in 14 games. The Bucks are 11-3. And during that stretch, the scoring averages are the same as they are for the league as a whole, which is no surprise. But Joel Embiid is number 1. he is averaging just under 37 points per game in 11 games played during that stretch. Luka Doncic is number 2, just under 35 points per game in 12 games played. And then you have Giannis, who is averaging 33 points per game in 14 games played. We mentioned the efficiency. 66% field goal shooting from the floor in those 14 games. He is attempting just 1 3-pointer per game, so even less than the overall season totals that he was averaging, about 2 per game that he was taking in those games played prior to missing that Raptors game. And now in the game since, it's just 1. But most importantly, free throw shooting. He is at 70%. Getting to the line about 12 times per game, and he is making just over 8 of those attempts per game. So not only has Giannis been much more efficient in those games played since then, he's been very, very efficient at the free throw line. In those games, he's taken 165 free throw attempts. Now, he's played more games than Joel Embiid, but that's 30 more trips to the line than Joel Embiid. And again, 70%. I've mentioned it a number of times. If he can get to and sit at that 70% mark, I think that's the big thing that you look for. That's all you really ask for, is get to 70%. Because if you're getting to the line, the volume of times that Giannis is, and you're making 7 out of every 10, we've got this Damian Lillard guy as well that we know he can do the same thing. And that changes things offensively for this team. The other thing when we talk about changing things offensively is, look, it's still very early, and it's only a quarter of the season to pull from here. But right now, the Bucks have the top-rated offense in the half court. So we kind of assumed this would be one of the big changes with Damian Lillard going from Drew Holiday to Damian Lillard, and what that changes in the half court. Not only your efficiency by getting to the free throw line with Dame, but his ability to create those shots for himself and score for so many years. And it's not to say the Bucks need to go away from it, because Giannis is still the number 1 guy in transition in terms of scoring the basketball. But for so many years, that was it. You would force misses, you would get in transition, off and running, nobody's stopping Giannis. Easier said than done. You can do that, and you can find success doing that in the regular season. But as we had seen, once you get to the postseason, things start to change. And they certainly did for the Bucks. But this year, Damian Lillard and that element has really started to move the needle in the half court. The Bucks were 13th last year, and they've had some good seasons in terms of half court efficiency in the NBA. The year prior to that, I mentioned they were 13th last year. Coming off the NBA title in the 21-22 season, they were 5th. But the number in the points per possession category is higher this season than it's ever been, at 105.4. Pacers are 105.3 points per play in the half court. It just feels different this year because of the Damian Lillard element and his ability to create shots, not only for himself, but for his teammates as well. When you think about the looks that Malik Beasley gets, Brook Lopez, and how he's been used somewhat differently this year as well. It's a much, much different half-court offense for the Bucks, and I think that really, really shows in these quarter of a season's worth of games that we've seen from this team so far. And the other thing that we're always going to monitor and keep an eye on is that defense. So again, the total season, the aggregate of numbers here through 25 games, the Bucks have an offensive rating of 120.2. Only 3 teams have an offensive rating of 120 or better so far this season. That is the Bucks, the Sixers, who are 121.9, and the Pacers, who are 121.9. So both the Sixers and the Pacers tied for the top offensive rating in the league. Now, for the Pacers, that defense is 120.4, certainly suboptimal. Defensive rating for the Bucks, they currently sit 21 at 115.4. But again, 21 through 14 are separated by just 1 point per 100 possessions. It's not until you get to 12, 13 that you really start to see a couple of points worth of gap. So piece together some of these types of outings. You would have loved to hold the Pistons to a little bit lower point total, but piece together some of these games. You'll have that opportunity with the Spurs on Tuesday. And before you know it, the Bucks are going to be moving up closer and closer to the middle of the pack in terms of where their defensive rating sits. But that's exactly where they are if we keep looking back. And at this point, it's not really cherry picking. We're looking at 21 games that the Bucks have played in since November 3rd. They're 16-5. That is the second most wins in the league. Only the Minnesota Timberwolves have won more. They're 17-3. But in those games, the Bucks have an offensive rating of 121.6, which is about 1 point per 100 possessions better than the season average. They still trail the Sixers and the Pacers, who are 2-1. Defensive rating is 114.7. So just slightly better than what we've seen for the season as a whole. And that currently sits at 13th in the league. And they're just the slimmest of margins away from being 11th. So don't look now. But in those games played since November 3rd, the Bucks offense has been consistently great and even better than it's been. The defense as well is knocking on the door of the top 10. And I'm going to keep harping on this. That's all you can ask for. Give us a league average defense or slightly better than league average. Our offense is going to be elite, and they'll take care of the rest from there. And so far, 25 games into the season, 21 games with this adjusted defense, I think that is exactly what we have seen from this Bucks group. I'm going to get into the preview of the Houston Rockets, what to expect from this team that is coming into Milwaukee, already in Milwaukee and ready for a showdown tonight, coming up after the break. And after we talk to you about our friends at FanDuel. So weather gets colder, the NFL deals stay hot on FanDuel. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. It's $150 just if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action because the app is easy to use and a number of betting options like spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, the Houston Rockets come to town tonight. And this is a Rockets team. If we go back to that November 3rd date that I referenced, it's a Rockets team that has a defensive rating of 105.5. I mentioned that because that is the top defense in the league in games played since then. They have played 18 games. They've gone 12-6 in those games, and a 105.5 defensive rating, a net rating of 6.8, which is right in line with the Bucks. So if we just look at the net rating here, the top 5 teams in the NBA since that date of November 3rd are number 1 by a wide margin, the Philadelphia 76ers, 12.1. Number 2 is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have a net rating of 8.9. Then you have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have gone 17-3 and have a net rating of 7.8. The Bucks at 16-5 with a 6.9 net rating. And then you have the Houston Rockets with a 6.8. This is a team that certainly gets it done defensively, and it's no surprise with Ime Udoka at the helm for Houston. He has really instilled a big change in terms of their defensive approach and just in terms of the growth of all these young players. You've added a couple of vets as well. The notable names, Dillon Brooks, who is certainly going to speak to that defense and what the Rockets have brought there. Fred VanVleet as well. But to me, the interesting matchup is what could have been versus what is. The Rockets pursued Brook Lopez hard in the offseason for reasons still very unknown to a lot of people when you have Alperen Şengün back there who has done nothing but develop at a rapid pace so far this season. So watching that matchup of Lopez versus Şengün is going to be most interesting in this game tonight. Alperen Şengün is the Rockets' leading scorer at just under 20 points per game. He is averaging 5 assists per game, 9 rebounds as well, and just under 1 blocked shot. But he's also been very efficient, shooting just 31% on his threes. He takes about 2.5 per game, very similar to what we've seen from Brook Lopez. He gets up shots from all around the floor, but he is almost, and I hate to use this term, He's played almost like a poor man's Nikola Jokic in terms of his ball movement. Talked about the assists, not the high number of assists that Nikola Jokic has, but the offense moves through Alperen Şengün for a majority of the time. Jalen Green, another young player, standout third-year player, just over 17, just under 18 points per game. And you've seen a big step forward from Jabari Smith Jr. as well. Last year's first-round draft pick. He has started to become much, much more consistent this year. And the work that Ime Udoka has done with him has really started to show. And when you look at what he's done overall, rebounding the basketball is what pops off the page the most. He has 5 consecutive games, double digits in rebounds, had a 20-10 game just the other night against the Memphis Grizzlies. So he's been much more consistent there. And I think that's always what the thought was with Jabari Smith Jr., with his quickness and lateral ability and size, that he was going to be a very, very ideal defensive pairing and kind of slowly bring around the offense. And that's what we've seen so far this season. About 13 points per game, 9 rebounds as well. But he has the skill set to be a gifted defender in this league. So the Rockets like to get it done with their defense. This is another team that the Bucks are going to face. Not terrible, not great when it comes to three-point shooting. They're right there in the middle of the pack, but they do a very, very good job of defending the perimeter and the three-pointer. Again, Jabari Smith Jr. and his switching ability, Dylan Brooks and what he's brought to this team as well. Those are big keys. So how can the Bucks get up some of those shots is going to be a big, big determining factor in this game tonight. But with a young team that likes to play up and down, the number one thing that we're going to point to, and we've mentioned quite a few times already this season, is turnovers. You have to earmark that. Bucks did a very, very good job in the first half and really most of the third quarter against the Detroit Pistons before ultimately started to see those turnovers start to pile up. And look, it's the Pistons, not to discredit them, but you're going to have a lot more wiggle room against a team like the Detroit Pistons. The Bucks had 15 turnovers in the game, and 4 of those in the third quarter, 5 in the second quarter. First quarter is where they really, really did a good job of protecting that. And again, the first 5 minutes being critical is what we heard from Adrian Griffin before the game. So that's no surprise, but you just cannot give the Houston Rockets any added ammunition with those turnovers and allow them to score off of turnovers, get second chance points in that nature as well. The other area that we've frequently pointed to is rebounding and the Bucks' quest to improve there. It's not going to be any easier tonight. The Rockets enter as one of the better rebounding teams in the league. And again, if we're just looking at that date of November 3rd, second best in total rebounds and best defensive rebounding team. So don't turn the ball over and at least hold your own on the glass. Those are going to be 2 big keys to a victory tonight for the Bucks. Camille will be back tomorrow morning with the game recap of this Rockets game. Hopefully, we are talking about a Bucks victory and a tough one for the Madden household too, a house divided with the Bucks versus the Rockets. But Camille and Frank will have the game recap for you on the next show. I'll be back early next week with Camille to take a look at the rest of this homestand. 2 games will remain. The San Antonio Spurs on Tuesday, and then a big one with the Orlando Magic on Thursday. And by the way, one last thing to note here, the Bucks, especially if they win, only if they win tonight, you're going to gain some ground because later on today, the Celtics host the Magic. So one of those 2 teams is going to take a loss. Either the Magic will be 17-8 and now a game back of the Bucks and the Sixers, and the Celtics will drop to 19-6, or you'll get a little more separation between yourself and that Orlando Magic team that right now you and Philly are tied a game and a half in front of the Magic. So you win, you're 19-7, the Celtics potentially 19-6. You could be a half game out of first place when you wake up tomorrow, but you got to take care of business and win. Camille and Frank will be back with a game recap later on tonight. I will talk to you next week on Locked On Bucks.